Si no creyera en la locura de la garganta del sinsonte, si no creyera que en el monte se esconde el trino y la pavura, si no creyera en la balanza, en la razón del equilibrio, si no creyera en el delirio, si no creyera en la esperanza, si no creyera en lo que agencio, si no creyera en mi camino, si no creyera en mi sonido, si no creyera en mi silencio, qué cosa fuera la masa sin cantera, un amasijo hecho de cuerdas y tendones, un revoltijo de carne con madera, un instrumento sin mejores resplandores.
And I just want to point out, first of all, that I remember back in 1994 when there weren't any genetically engineered seeds or crops or food. And we should all remember that because our food and farming system was terrible then. You know, terrible for human health, terrible the treatment of animals, terrible destruction of the earth and biodiversity, terrible in terms of the climate impacts that was having. So if we got rid of GMOs tomorrow, we still have a life-threatening system on the earth of food and farming and land use that's going to kill us all. It's the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas pollution. 11 to 18% of all the greenhouse gases in the world are produced by fossil fuel use in industrial agriculture, producing the pesticides, the fertilizers, the fossil fuel used on the farms. You know, we've got 15 to 18% of all greenhouse gases are caused by the deforestation, the rampant deforestation that we're seeing in South America, for example, or in Malaysia or Indonesia, in the Amazon, are caused by industrial agriculture. All right, another 15 to 20% of all greenhouse gases are caused by our crazed system of processed food, you know, insane packaging of food, and insane transportation. The average food item in the United States has traveled 1,500 miles, you know, whereas 50 years ago, most of what people bought was produced 100 miles away. And finally, 2 to 4% of all greenhouse gases are caused by food waste, that is, throwing food waste into landfills, you know, instead of making them into compost the way organic agriculture requires. So we're going to all die if we don't change our industrial food and farming system. And if we don't die, our children and our grandchildren. This is a matter of life or death. And we're not about just bringing down Monsanto. You know, we're about bringing down this industrial food and farming and land use system before it exterminates us all. And that being said, I'm happy that over the last 20 years, the anti-GMO movement in the United States has been, we've connected it to, we're not just against, you know, GMOs and industrial ag, we're for organic agriculture. We're for what we called for a long time sustainable agriculture. Back in 1994, polls showed 40% of American consumers think that genetically engineered foods are dangerous. 40%. 40% said back in 1944 they weren't sure whether they're dangerous or not. You know, and 20% thought, yeah, they're safe. Well, it's interesting. Polls today show exactly the same thing. You know, 21 years later, most people, you know, the reason they want labeling is because they would avoid buying it. You know, if we had labeling in the United States, which we started pushing for in '94, we wouldn't have genetically engineered crops in our food, in our processed food, just like Europe, you know, and we wouldn't have hardly any acreage. But the thing is, in the United States, we don't really have a democracy. We have the semblance of a democracy. And even though 90% of the public have always said they want labeling, we never got it at the federal level. And we're never going to get it at the federal level until we overthrow the government. But we figured out a number of years ago that we have this strange system in the United States of federalism that we've had for 200 years, where state governments have some power, city and county governments have some power, and the federal government has this power. And the Constitution says if the federal government doesn't expressly have a power, that a state, can require labeling of GMOs, for example. Okay. So we finally, we started talking about this over 10 years ago, that we needed to do state ballot initiatives if we were ever going to get labeling, if we were ever going to drive this stuff off the market. But in the United States, money is so huge, in the political system, that to run a ballot initiative like California, we raised $10 million, the movement in California, and Monsanto and them spent $30 million and more on that. So it costs a lot of money. But finally, we decided in 2011 that we were never going to defeat GMOs unless we could make this issue much bigger, make it debated all over the country, that we had to get serious about raising money. And so all these NGOs that have been dependent on foundation money for their budgets, right? And foundations tell you, we'll give you this $50,000, we'll give you this $100,000, but don't do anything political, because they're afraid, they're afraid of the laws. So a number of us said, you know what, forget about foundations. We have to raise the money from the grassroots. The way you raise the money from the grassroots is everyone puts our email list together and our Facebook pages together, and we ask 10 million people, 20 million people on the same day to send in money. And a lot of them will send in $10 or $20 or whatever. The other thing we said is, forget about foundations. We need to ally with businesses, with ethical businesses who have an economic incentive in organics and non-GMO. And so we approached companies in 2011, like Dr. Bronner's soap company, and they said, yeah, we'll give $1 million for California. We approached Dr. Bronner's, a vitamin company, natural health company. They said, yeah, we'll give $2 million, and so on. So by forming an alliance, the anti-GMO movement joined, the anti-GMO and organic movement joined hands with the natural health movement. It's like, if we hadn't done this, we wouldn't be where we are now, and ethical businesses. And so we got serious. We raised $30 million in 3 ballot initiatives. Yeah, we lost. It looks like they stole the vote in California, by manipulating electronic voting machines, but we couldn't prove it at the end. We lost by 800 votes in 2013. In Oregon, again, we would have won, except they disqualified several thousand votes that would have been for us. But the thing is, we may have lost these ballot initiatives, but we won the battle, because the public became aware that genetic engineering, and more importantly than that, and the toxic chemicals that always accompany genetic engineering, the toxic animal drugs that always accompany genetic engineering, the toxic agricultural chemicals that destroy the environment and the climate and always accompany GMOs. What are GMOs? They're just a delivery system for toxic chemicals. That's what they are, But, we didn't, as a movement, we didn't learn how to say that until recently. Now we know how to say it. Now we see, because we're thinking back 20 years, well, how come the polls have always said that 80% of the public are concerned about pesticide contamination in food? 80%! And only 40% have always said that GMOs they think are dangerous. Well, why didn't we get this before now? Well, we get it now. And the World Health Organization, thank goodness, is helping us. So I guarantee you, the Achilles heel of this industry right now, GMOs, industrial agriculture, globalization, we got to go after glyphosate. Global ban on glyphosate, and we've got to test the common consumer foods, not only for glyphosate and AMPA and what other breakdown elements we still don't know are in there, but the other things that are in there too. It's like you eat some factory farm beef in Argentina. It's not like the grass-fed beef that your parents ate, you know? It's like it's poison. Well, why is it poison? Well, it's got glyphosate residues in it and things like atrazine residues, but it also has these nasty animal drugs like ractopamine or Zilmax. I mean, these things are, you know, they're equally dangerous, the GMOs. The public are freaked out about the thought that their daughter, you know, has breasts and she's like 8 years old. You know, I mean, that's why the polls show people are concerned about artificial hormones, you know, and growth promoters. And so we need to broaden our argument to, you know, basically this food is poison and it's killing us, obviously. Look at the health statistics in the United States. I mean, people are saying, oh yeah, every other kid's going to have autism by 2050. Well, I mean, have you ever known a family with an autistic kid? This is the rest of your life you're going to spend taking care of this child who didn't deserve to have autism. I mean, we are at a health crisis, you know, we're at a climate crisis. Let's connect the dots to all these things. What progress have we made now in the United States? Well, obviously we've got a huge amount, 185 million acres of genetically engineered crops in the country, but they're having problems. The super weeds are horrible. We're just about to come out with a study in a couple of days that show only 3 states in the United States require you to report pesticide use and chemical fertilizer use: Vermont, California, and New York. Well, we just did a study in Vermont, which everyone thinks is a green state, Ben and Jerry's, and all that. Well, it turns out there's been a 226% increase in the use of toxic herbicides. And it's not just Roundup. Atrazine and all the rest that they claim we're going to use less of, they're using more of them, you know, basically. So we need to go on the offensive like that. We've got 9 counties out of 3,200 in the U.S. that have banned GMOs. We've got 1 state, Vermont, that has passed a law requiring labeling. And you might think, wow, America's got over 300 million people. Vermont has 500,000. Why is this so important? You know, well, the reason it's important is, say you're Coca-Cola right now. You're looking at a July 2016 deadline to label your product as containing genetically engineered high fructose corn syrup, right? Well, what are you going to do? All right, at first they said, well, we'll stop selling Coca-Cola in Vermont. Well, great. That would be the best thing that ever happened to public health in history. They can't do that, you know. What are they going to say? We don't sell in Vermont anymore because they were going to make us reveal the fact that we're using genetically engineered high fructose corn syrup, you know. No. Well, what's the other alternative for Vermont? Well, we'll just label in Vermont, but not everywhere else. Well, can you imagine that? You on the national news, made with genetic engineering, Coca-Cola. Well, what about Canada? What about Mexico? What about the other 49 states? It's just like, they can't do that. They're going to have to, and I saw some billboards when I was in Vermont recently, they're starting to advertise what they call the True Coke or something. They say, sweetened with stevia and cane syrup. Well, I mean, that's what Coca-Cola is going to do. You know, and this is a big deal because all these million acres of genetically engineered sugar beets, you know, in Minnesota and other states, what the hell are they going to do with all these sugar beets, you know? So, one state has tremendous power, and you know, we've got a couple of other states. Alaska passed a law pushed through by the most conservative people in U.S. politics, Sarah Palin and other people. In 2005, they said genetically engineered salmon in Alaska have to be labeled. Well, that's a big problem for the genetic engineering industry, because if you can't get the right-wing Republicans to agree to a law that will eliminate states' ability to label, you got a problem. And I'm telling you, the Alaskan Republicans aren't going to back down on the salmon. So, 5% of all grocery store food in the United States right now is certified organic. Okay? 10% of our fruits and vegetables right now are certified organic. So it's a $40 billion industry. It's just the beginning, but an important thing is, quote, natural food. That's another $40 billion industry, and the vitamin sector is another $35 billion industry. Right now in the United States, consumers who don't know the difference between natural and organic, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to protect their families. They're trying to protect the environment. They're trying to, you know, support small farmers and fair trade. There's 20%, you know, of some of their grocery, you know, it's around 15 now, the average, is going for food that's natural or organic. Now, the natural is a fraud. That's the reason why industry is so concerned. The Vermont law makes it against the law to call genetically engineered foods natural. And they're going to fight that like hell in court. What are the lessons that we've learned, you know, over the last 20 years fighting GMOs and promoting organic and trying to promote fair trade and sustainability? Well, one of them is that don't rely on the government to do the right thing. They're getting worse, not better, at least in the U.S. Although I saw yesterday in Alberta, the new Democratic Party swept the elections, much to the chagrin of the tar sands industry and so on. We need to create an echo chamber. What I mean by an echo chamber is, if you look in the country where you live, at all the different organizations that are trying to talk about this, it adds up to a lot of people. You know, 10 million people we have right now in the U.S. from organizations we can call on to send out an email about this. 20 million Facebook members. We have to do what the right wing and the corporations have done. We have to get messages amplified. It doesn't matter if what we're saying is true. If there's no amplification, it doesn't matter. You know, and repetition. You have to tell partner and over again, this food, you know, poisons your daughter or your son. You know, this has glyphosate. They have to hear it over and over and over again. And finally it sinks in. We have to look at, we're not as strong as the other side. They're not playing fair. The governments are getting worse. The mass media is getting worse. The industry is more desperate and more sophisticated. I mean, if you look at the number of articles out there that are saying that scientific consensus says GMOs are safe, you count the number of articles coming out in every language, every month, it's 10 times higher than it was 5 years ago. Well, why is that? Well, it's not because it's true, it's an obvious lie, but it's because the industry is getting worried. We're winning the battle for the hearts and minds of the people. We've reached a level to where marketplace pressure, I mean, companies like McDonald's are scared to death in the United States now. General Mills, Kellogg's, their profit margins are down to this. If they couldn't sell their crap to Latin America and Asia and Africa, they'd be out of business, you know. So they're vulnerable. We got to hit them. We got to hit them, and hit them hard now, you know. But we've got to realize that the people across the world, you know, everyone has different passions in a particular country. You don't get up in India and talk about climate change as the #1 issue in the country. The #1 issue in India, you know, is poverty you know, and especially rural poverty, right? Same thing in Mexico. But you talk about the issues and you connect them together. I mean, the solution to global poverty, the solution to the climate crisis, the solution to decreasing biodiversity, the solution to the fact that we lead these empty, consumerist lives, you know, where young people can't even figure out if it's worth living anymore. The solution to all these problems is the same solution. Let's have a food and farming system, an energy system, an economic system that's based on justice, that's based on sustainability, that's based on democracy, that's based on peace, you know, and health. And let's start from where people are at. Well, let's combine our sources globally, because this is it. This is it. We've got 20 more years to turn things around before climate crisis is going to spiral into out of control climate catastrophe that's going to spawn nuclear wars. And, you know, it's just like, we can do it. We can do it. We are starting to do it. And we're determined now to work together closely, and we're going to win this battle. Thank you.
¿Qué cosa fuera la masa sin cantera? Un amasijo hecho de cuerdas y tendones, un revoltijo de carne con madera.